Hello, and welcome to the very first edition of What the Hardware? Here on Engelbart. This will be a series that takes a look at various pieces of equipment that are designed typically with some sort of retro gaming purpose in mind. What are we kicking off the series with? Well, it'll be a look at count 'em, three controllers that are either modeled after or inspired by the Genesis and Saturn 6-button controllers. Yes, we'll be taking a look at these in what I am dubbing the Sega-like controller not quite so spectacular! All of us have controllers that we love and appreciate, and this is one of mine. This is the Sega Genesis 6-button controller that was released just around the same time as the original Mortal Kombat for the Genesis, and just a little bit before Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition. Now I got two of these bad boys right around the time they were released, and me and my brothers and our friends used to play a lot of Mortal Kombat against each other. Those were the days. But I do have to say, I'm really more of a Street Fighter guy, and this controller was just great for Street Fighter. There is just one major problem with this lovely Genesis controller, and that is, it seems no matter how hard I try, no matter how forcefully I push, I just can't get it to work with my computer. And you know what? Believe it or not, I've had the same exact problem with my Raspberry Pi, well, one of them, which is here inside this beautiful Mega Pi case. And that's where these three controllers come in. We have a wired USB controller, modeled after the Genesis 6-button pad from Retroflag, makers of the Mega Pi case you just saw. We also have a newly made controller inspired by both Sega's Genesis and Saturn controllers that runs over Bluetooth in the 8bitdo M30. And then finally today, I've got this brand spanking new Saturn controller that operates on a 2.4 GHz wireless frequency with either a USB or Saturn port dongle. This one even comes with a case to keep your dongle in, because if there's one thing you don't want to do, it's lose your dongle. Okay, first up, this is the Retroflag Classic USB Gamepad. Catchy name, I know. It was made to accompany the Retroflag Mega Pi Raspberry Pi case, which is awesome. Now since this is USB, it works with just about everything that has a USB port. Here's some footage of me using it. Now here's some footage of me using it to control some games. While you watch this, here's the deal with this controller. First up, it's a lot smaller than the US version of the official Sega 6-button controller. It also has an L button, and in the place where a mode button would be, it has an R button. And it also has a brand spanking new select button. The L button on this controller, I've got to say, is basically useless because it's so easy to hit by accident. I end up unassigning it because of how much of an issue that became. The pad itself felt great at first, but I've had this bad boy for about a year now, and for some reason, it now makes a skin-curdling crunchy sound when you press into it and move it around. Lastly, I would say this one doesn't feel quite as durable as a Sega controller. Now, it's pretty cheap, and if you just want it to complete your own little Mega Pi Genesis set, then hey, go for it. Otherwise, I'd probably avoid this one. Now, it works pretty well when it works, but I've just had some other issues with it. Things like it somehow losing all its assignments in RetroPie, and just various other weird niggling issues. It just hasn't been a great experience. The second controller we have today is the 8bitdo M30. Now, I'm going to completely spoil the review here and say that I love this thing. It feels so comfortable and premium. I've had this one since the day it came out and it's just spiffy. 8bitdo has created what feels like the controllers Sega might have made if the Genesis were released today and, you know, if Sega were still in actual business instead of just the ghost of Sega. Now there are several different versions of this controller, including the Bluetooth version that you see here, and there's also 2.4 GHz version, and several others that use various dongles. Here's me using this controller. Beep 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 beep. Hello? And here's me using this controller to control some games. Now I've used this one extensively on a Raspberry Pi, a few PCs, my Nvidia Shield, and I haven't had any problems at all on any platform. Well, that's a lie. Since the Bluetooth is wonky on the Pi, I've occasionally had some issues getting it connected, but I blame the Pi for that, since it works fine on everything else. Stupid Pi. Otherwise, this has been solid, and I've only had a Bluetooth disconnect happen one time, after many hours of use, over the course of about a year. Speaking of hours of use, the battery is pretty good too. I haven't had to charge this thing much at all. I haven't experienced any significant delay or lag with this controller either, which for Bluetooth is pretty impressive. So this one, yeah, I heartily recommend it. It's not too expensive, and for retro gaming, it's pretty sweet. It also works with the Switch, but I've never used it on my Switch because, well, really? Why would I? So yeah, worth it. Also, it's USB-C. Hooray! The final controller we'll look at today is this RetroBit officially licensed Sega Saturn controller. This is the 2.4 GHz version that comes with both a USB and Sega Saturn controller port dongle. Now my original Saturn, which I got in May '95 just after the launch, came with the original US pads, which are of a different design, as you can see here. These didn't get switched out for the Japanese style pads until considerably later. I do also have two of the Sega Saturn 3D pads that came with Knights, but this doesn't look like those, so I'm not going to bother showing them here. Now, there's been quite a bit of positive buzz about this controller, so I was really anxious to give it a try. And I hate to say it, but for me, this has not lived up to expectations. It feels overly light, and the buttons kind of jiggle around too much inside the case. And it has a major problem in that the C button on my controller has gotten stuck in the press down position several times. Anyway, here's me using this controller. And now here's me using this controller to actually play some games. I also think the shoulder button layout is kind of awkward and not very comfortable on this controller, which, you know, may be a symptom of the original design, but even if it is, I just don't like it. The pad itself feels spot on, it's super comfortable, and the most positive feature on this controller. Like with the M30, I haven't noticed any significant lag while using this controller, so that's another point in its favor. Plus, it works on my Saturn. That's great! Except my Saturn is on life support and doesn't always work right anymore. That's bad. So is this one worth it? You know, let's assume that I just got stuck with a bad controller. If the C button was in perfect working order, I'd have to say I'd probably still have been a little let down by this controller. It just lacks that premium feel that I would have expected out of an officially licensed Sega product, even in this day and age. One other thing I'll note is there are a lot of varieties of this controller available, including wired ones for USB, for the Saturn, Bluetooth versions, other dongle versions, and all of them are cheaper than this particular version, so if you can get one at a much lower price, it may be worth it. And as much as I wanted this to be a great wireless Saturn controller, I've got to say I really can't recommend it as is. So there you have it. Now if you could only get one of these controllers, which one would I recommend? Well, the choice is a complete no-brainer for me. It would be the 8bitdo M30. Why? Well, this one just feels like it's the most solidly built, and it feels like an actual premium product, like something that Sega might have designed themselves if the Genesis were being released today. It also has a completely ideal button layout for loads of classic platforms, whether it be an actual Genesis itself, arcade games, NES, Sega Master System, Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, PC Engine, TurboGrafx 16, the list goes on and on. Basically, it's utterly fantastic for anything that doesn't require the SNES popularized diamond button layout formation, or anything that uses a number pad like the Intellivision or ColecoVision, let's say. And it's very easy to get this working on a variety of modern platforms. So if you're using a PC, if you've either got built-in Bluetooth or a dongle, it'll work just great. If you're using a Raspberry Pi, if it's a 3B Plus or above, or any of the Zeros that have Bluetooth built in, easy to connect and get working. If you're using Android devices, it's super easy to connect and get working. So really, this one does it all, feels premium, and I can't recommend it enough. It's just great. It's by far my favorite modern controller, and I say this as someone that was not very jazzed about the 8bitdo SNES controllers that they released a little bit before this one. And that will just about do it for this one. If you liked the video, feel free to click like, subscribe, ring the bell, etc. Support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Engelbart. And with that, I will say thanks for watching, and see me later.